This video will be released on April 29, 10 PM Pacific, which will be the exact time and date that the gacha game known as Nier Reincarnation ends its service permanently. It's not every day that the legendary mastermind behind the Nier franchise, Yoko Taro, could release a spin-off gacha that expands on the same universe, and, well, that day is about to come to a close, because Nier Reincarnation will not be playable from this point onwards. But before its time is up, let's reminisce on what the game was actually about and briefly review its gameplay, story, and design. Let's see just how good a live service spin-off of the highly successful Nier franchise can be, and why it ultimately would not last past today. It's time to send one last farewell to the game, and join me today to find out, was Nier Reincarnation any good? Now, to begin, a little backstory about me. Nier Automata, or Automata, however you want to pronounce it, to this day has my #1 favorite video game soundtrack of all time. I thought the game was a piece of art according to my late teenage brain. When I played it back in 2017, I worshipped the creator, Yoko Taro. I wanted to find out more about his past works and dive deeper into the Nier franchise. Combined with Keiichi Okabe's beautifully composed soundtrack, I didn't think video games as a medium could get any better. So when I caught wind that the same people will be behind a mobile game that expands on the universe, I couldn't wait to give it a shot. Nier Reincarnation first launched in February of 2021, with the global servers launching a bit later in the summer that year. Its entire runtime will last just over 3 years, with its services ending on April 29, 2024. Though for most people this will be April 30th. It was developed by a company called Applebot, with Square Enix taking the helm as the publisher, which I know already raises some red flags, but whatever. The story begins with a lone girl, simply known as the Girl of Light, waking up in a mysterious tower/labyrinth called The Cage. She is accompanied by a floating ghost thing named Mama, and navigates around the tower to collect fragments of stories with the hopes to remember who she really was. Now, with end of service pending soon as I edit the video, I obviously won't have time to read through the entire story, so I can't comment how good the writing is. Though judging from general sentiment online, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I loved Nier Automata's story, but that was because it was a huge open world and the story was just a single large overarching plot. But in Reincarnation, it's more or less split up into tiny pieces of different stories strewn together, which doesn't really give too much time to develop the characters before moving on to the next. The presentation is mostly done using black and white silhouettes that represent the characters, with the narrator explaining what's going on. The interactivity of the story itself doesn't go beyond just holding down on the left or right movement keys and tapping objects when they appear. Now, what really caught me off guard was the music. It's composed by the one and only Keiichi Okabe, the same person behind Automata's OST. And it is superb here as well. I know Nikkei did a Nier collab last year, and the soundtrack was a good attempt at recreating the feel of it, but it still doesn't compare to the real deal. Aside from that, at least, Square Enix did have the decency to let the writers finish the story, as the final chapters released 1 month prior to the game's closure. It's worth mentioning that no matter what you think of the story and its OST, this game cannot be played anymore. The only way to enjoy it is by searching it up online. Now let's take a look at the gameplay. To put it plainly, there is no gameplay. Reincarnation is one of those auto-battlers where you collect shiny new units and watch them do flashy animations. While it may seem like I'm actually doing something on screen, the truth is this is completely automatic. You can bring up to 3 characters into a battle, and it almost acts like turn-based combat, where you have 2 skills and an ult, except when you select them, you don't actually use it right away, and it just waits until it's that character's turn before actually activating it. You can move your characters around, but it literally does nothing, as they auto-attack based on an interval and there's no dodge mechanic, so even if it really looks like you would have evaded an attack, it's gonna hit you anyways. On some levels, you can manual it if the timing in which the skills are used matters, but most of the time, this is an auto-battle game. An element system does exist, and so does a weapon system. The weapons are grouped together with the characters in the gacha banners that I will explain later. I never really got into the ins and outs of combat, but the depth is there if you want to get into it. Though you were mainly just figuring out how to let the game auto-battle for you in the most efficient way possible. How leveling and ascension works is a bit odd, as you can initially level a character or weapon to a whopping 70 or 60 respectively, then spend their respective gacha resources to break the count. There's also skill levels, of course, per usual with a lot of these gacha games. The most important thing to understand here is that when the game was still live, what was considered meta was simply just the strongest auto-battle team. The main game world is basically this massive labyrinth that you can walk through, with points of it containing a shadowy figure that you can observe and reveal a new part of a story. There's also these barriers that serve as the filler levels that you have to beat to reach the next portion of the labyrinth. As you might expect, certain upgrades require a material that can be dropped from farming certain levels. But there is an auto battle feature, though it's not the most efficient one I've seen, as you'd still have to sit through your characters actually going through the level. If at any time you want to check on your tasks, battle pass, or view the shop, you can just tap on the mama icon on the bottom right. As of this recording, they have disabled the ability to do in-app purchases, and the premium battle pass can't be bought anymore, as it should with these nearing its end-of-service games. It would be pretty messed up if they still charge money at this point. Now we talk about the gacha. Knowing Square Enix is the publisher, we're in for a rough ride. Gacha rarity is split into 2, 3, and 4 stars, basically R, SR, and SSR. The game has a focus on weapons as opposed to characters, as it's possible to only pull a 3 or 4-star weapon and a separate chance to pull the character and their weapon at the same time. For example, you have a 2% chance to pull a 4-star character plus the weapon, and a 3% to only pull a 4-star weapon. This combined together makes 5%, except everyone plays gacha games for the characters, so realistically, the chance of getting something that you want is just 2%. But here's the tricky bit. Let's take a look at one of the last banners of the game, featuring the unit 10H on rate up. Without looking at the rate up chance, can you take a guess on what it might be? Well, most gachas these days do the 50-50 coin toss for the rate up character, so naturally I first assumed it was 1%. Except if I pull up the page that shows the rates, the individual rate for 10H is not displayed at the top, which is usually how it works for most gachas these days. So the question is, what exactly is the chance to pull 10H? I checked some other tabs since I thought each banner had specific rules, but after a while I realized that the rates tab is the correct page to see the chance of the rate up. And this is one of the most sneaky things I've seen. If you drag the list for each individual item all the way down, hidden near the bottom of the page, you will see that the rate up chance for 10H is 0.66%. This is something I noticed for gacha games that are spin-offs of existing intellectual properties, is that their rates are generally lower, and this is just my own theory, but I think it's because the developers know that there is already an existing audience for the IP that you're creating the game for. You know that fans of that IP are willing to pay more for the shiny characters since they are already familiar with them and have emotional ties to them. Now, a pity system does exist at 200 pulls, but just from a glance, if I see rates like these, I'm already sensing a red flag. One pull costs 300 gems, or 3,000 for a multi, so that will be 60,000 gems in total to reach pity. Now, I can't comment on the frequency in which gems were given out, since the cash shop is closed and I wasn't here for the past 3 years. These rates would have been tough to swallow, but I guess if other elements of the game were good, then maybe you don't really need to focus on it. Except in this game, a character can equip 3 weapons, a companion that gives passive buffs, and 3 memoirs, which are basically artifacts from Genshin. Each weapon has their own skill to level, and the memoirs are farmed based on its set and containing up to 4 sub-abilities as you enhance them. And yes, it is random as to which ones you get. So in short, you better get grinding. At this point, I also can't vouch for the quality of events or content frequency, so with the remainder of this video, let's discuss the general sentiments of the game's fans up until end of service and why this game eventually had to shut down. Nier Reincarnation had a pretty glorious launch. In Japan, it soared to the best-selling mobile game top charts within the first couple weeks, amassing over 10 million downloads and 15 million downloads overseas. Nier is a massively popular franchise. It's no doubt that many, including myself, were drawn in by Automata, and we wanted more of this universe created by Yoko Taro. Now, this man has been writing stories for gacha games for a while. I might even do a dedicated video on this topic one day, because it's quite an intriguing case. But for Reincarnation specifically, because it was directly tied to the already popular Automata, it got a lot of people hyped, which definitely explains the initial success. But what on earth happened after that? Why wasn't the game able to retain a large portion of its player base to the point of being shut down? Well, if the gameplay section didn't bore you enough, the main concern I noticed was that not all players were interested in playing an AFK auto-battler. Now, I know these idle games do have their fans. Some people just like seeing numbers go up, but considering that all of Yoko Taro's previous games, primarily the Nier ones, are 3D action RPGs, people were looking for something more akin to that. Once they got their hands on Reincarnation, they realized that there is quite a lot of grinding involved. Plus the fact that players barely have any agency during combat. and that repetitive nature was enough to turn some people away, coupled by the atrocious gacha rates on top. In fact, re-rolling was quite prevalent when the game first launched, as it was very advantageous to get multiple copies of certain meta units to make your time easier. Now, grind in video games can be subjective. Some games thrive on the grinding aspect, as players actually find it quite fulfilling. But there's also a certain type of grind that just feels like it's necessary before you get to continue with the main story, and one that's not so enjoyable. This is how I felt when I tried the game at launch. It just didn't have the same feeling Automata did. Let's compare this with the potion mixing event from Genshin a while back. Yeah, there's a lot of repetition in this gameplay loop, but players slate it as one of the most fun events we've had. It's repetitive, but it's enjoyable. There's also a difference between meta character builds needed for optional late game content, or a borderline mandatory to pass the main content in story campaigns. I can't vouch this for myself, but if you take something like Genshin for example again, you realistically only need meta teams for late game Spiral Abyss content, which only gives you a bit of extra goodies and is completely optional. Some gacha games like FGO do have difficult main story encounters, but they're clearable with even low rarity units as long as you understand the mechanics. This is different in Reincarnation, as you can't control anything except for the timings that your skills get used, so it puts a larger emphasis on team building and getting those vital upgrades. There was also talk of pay-to-win elements, as the game did have a PvP arena mode. My stance on the topic is that as long as the PvP mode doesn't contain any significant rewards or is too intrusive on the overall player experience, then I don't really have a problem with it. Let's take Nikke for example. Yeah, there's a PvP leaderboard, and yeah, it's populated with whales, but it's only there for bragging rights, and the PvP mode is only a very small portion of the overarching game. My overall feelings about the game is that it's got a beautifully written story and composed OST, but it's hugely marked by a non-existent gameplay system, stingy gacha rates, and monotonous grind. The cracks were forming when they announced that the English voiceovers will be discontinued about a year ago. Now Square Enix, being the ambitious company it is, had to cut costs, and this was a telltale sign that the game was not doing well. Unlike a select few gacha developers, there was no offline mode announced. So the story, the soundtrack, and the atmosphere, all that is gone from this point onwards. It's quite a shame, as Yoko Taro is known to have the ability to write believable worlds and captivating stories. Nier Reincarnation is a classic case of a hidden gem held back by a greedy publisher. This is the same company where the leadership tried to capitalize on the rise of NFTs, AI, and blockchain games. It's sad because I know for the existing fans of Reincarnation, this was a passion project that they devoted a large portion of their time to. But unfortunately, in the eyes of these major publishers, it's a sinking ship that wasn't raking in enough profits, and it's time to pull the plug. I know this brief overview of the Nier gacha game doesn't have nearly enough coverage as my atrocious gacha reviews, but I wanted to start this series to note down all the games that I was interested in that had its services terminated. For now, it's time to take a good last look at the cage, because we're never coming back. This is the first video for the series on this channel known as End of Service, and I'm afraid this farewell will only be the first of many. Thanks for tuning into the video. Let me know if you played Reincarnation and what you thought about it. I already got the next atrocious gacha review in the works right now, and it's gonna be for Path to Nowhere. Stay tuned if you enjoy other content in the gacha space just like this one. Leave a like, and always remember, have fun with the game.